Becki Gray is on the telephone. Becki is with the Carolina Journal and the John Locke Foundation, a frequent contributor to NC Spin and a good friend, and I think probably one of the most knowledgeable people about what's going on at the legislature. Good morning, Becki. How are you?
Good morning. Doing great. Hope
Hey,
you are. Thanks for having me on, Henry.
Yeah,
Great to be with you.
Yeah, it's always great to have you on. We get the straight poop because you're over there every day and you know what's going on. Hey, the governor was down here last night. He was in Morehead City, and he's still saying, "I'll veto the budget if the Senate doesn't back down." And then yesterday he interviewed with Mike Collins in a radio interview over in Charlotte. He likened what was happening with Phil Berger and Tom Apodaca and Harry Brown to the Bass Night Rand days. The Senate president didn't take too lightly to that and said, name calling was. He put out a statement. Phil Berger did last night saying, we don't have to do name calling. But look, let's be honest about it. There's some really hard feelings behind the scenes that no one in the Republican Party can kind of understand why the Senate digs in on some of these things. What's the latest on this? I mean, does anybody really believe that throwing all the teachers' assistants out and taking people off Medicaid so we can give school teachers an 11% raise is really a good idea?
Well, you threw a lot of stuff at me, Henry. So let me kind of, how long have we got here?
About 15 minutes. Go.
Right. Okay. One of the first things is this controversy between the House, and there's really three players in this: the House, the Senate, and the governor's office. And we see a lot of push and pull, and these are opinionated people. I think that all three of these entities, if you will, are very committed to conservative policies and moving the state forward in a conservative way that they were all elected to do. This bickering and the going back and forth is really nothing new. We saw this under Democrat administrations. We saw it when Democrats were in control of the governor's office in both bodies of the General Assembly. Kind of the difference is, first of all, this is new. These are new personalities, and so there's, sort of this fascination with all of this. The liberal media, in many cases, feed that. They're not getting along, they're not getting along.
I agree.
Another big difference is with Republicans and all of these people that we're talking about today, one of the things that they committed to also was open government and open meetings and not doing things behind closed doors.
Mm-hmm.
People who have been around for a long time, people who have sat in these budget negotiations and other negotiations about very important issues that have faced North Carolina have said this same kind of squabbling and fighting took place, but it was all done behind closed doors. So we didn't have, the tweets being updated and the blogs being done and the news reports every day because it was all done behind closed doors.
And let me say this: I witnessed some of that. If for people who think it's only the Republican, I witnessed some of that. We heard so much about Mark Bass Night during the days that the Democrats ran the state. But I'll tell you, I have, when Jim Black was the Speaker of the House, of course, Jim Black ended up in some trouble. But, he was very powerful at one time as well. And I know that Jim Black and Mark Bass Night often disagreed and banged heads as well.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, none of this is new. The good news is that the Republicans have really moved forward with transparency in the process. The bad news is now we have to watch it. When they were doing it behind closed doors, it was ugly, but we didn't have to watch it. Now we do. So, there's that. None of this is new. As far as the different positions on this, we have been involved. We at the Locke Foundation and Carolina Journal have been involved with these budget negotiations since the very beginning, going back to February and March. And, the positions that the Senate has taken, the positions that the House has taken, and the positions that the governor has taken go back, and they are all really founded in really strong beliefs on this is what we need to do to move North Carolina forward.
Mm-hmm.
The House, and where we are right now today is the budget negotiators have settled everything except education and health and human services.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so we're about 25% there. Education and health and human services are the biggest part of our budget, and this is where the real controversy lies. And where we are with this is, as you mentioned, the Senate is at an 11% average pay increase for the teachers. They are, the one thing, I'm not sure how all this is going to shake out, but the one thing that I can guarantee is that teachers are going to get a pay increase coming out of this.
Exactly.
Everybody is committed to that. The question is, how much and how do you pay for it? Now, the House has come out with a conservative and more cautious approach at 5%, although yesterday in some negotiations, it looks like with the revenue, the current revenue that we have, they may be able to go up to 6%. The Senate has said we want an 11% pay increase. That would constitute the largest pay increase for teachers in North Carolina's history. They are committed to that. Now, again, how do you pay for it? Well, the existing revenue, we can do about a 5-6% pay increase. If you go up to 11, you're going to have to take money from someplace else in order to pay for that. And the way that the Senate does that, as you mentioned, they eliminate teacher assistants, not all teacher assistants, but teacher assistants at the second and third grade level. Now, Henry, I know this sounds counterintuitive, but what empirical research, what empirical studies tell us is that teacher assistants do make a difference in the lower grades. But in second and third grades, there is not a correlation between having a teacher assistant in the classroom and student performance. So that's where the Senate has based their proposal on those things.
Right.
The House disagrees with that. Now, one way that, and we have worked up a 4-part compromise proposal at the Lott Foundation. It was on Carolina Journal Online yesterday, and I'm telling you, Henry, it is the best summary of where we are, how we got there, and how we might be able to break this impasse.
So what's the solution?
Okay, on the teacher pay thing, the thing that we are proposing is that we give teachers a 6% pay increase, as the House has proposed. But then we allow local governments, the local education districts, the school districts, to spend the teacher assistant money as they want to. And if a local government wants to use their teacher assistant money to pay teachers up to an 11% pay increase, they can do that.
Wow,
if
what a great idea. Yeah.
Then teachers, so what you've kind of got is you've got the House plan.
But you're going to put,
but
then you're going to put that debate about whether we should eliminate teaching assistants or not on the local county boards of education, and it's going to be very controversial at that level too, isn't it?
It may very well be. Now, what we have heard in the House last week, you may have heard about the meeting where the senators got up and left the meeting.
Oh, yeah, last Friday, or Thursday.
And what that was all about was the House had brought in a group of superintendents from across the state and some teachers to speak to the group and talk about how important teachers' assistants were to the education in their particular areas. So what that would do is, again, if those superintendents who came and spoke at the meeting, and if there are superintendents and leaders of the local school districts who really do believe that the money is better spent on teacher assistants, they get to do that. If there are districts where they feel like the money is better spent to increase that teacher pay up to what the Senate has proposed of 11%, then they can do that. So, it does take that debate back to the local level, but many of us, myself included, believe that a lot of those education decisions are better made closer to home.
The thing, and I don't want to get too much into personalities, and I got a couple of things I want to cover with you in a short period of time here. But the thing I don't understand is, the 11% idea. Why the Senate leadership is dug in so deeply on that? No one seems to think it's a good idea other than them. I mean, we've been taking phone calls. We've had school teachers calling in here. No one, including school teachers, thinks it's a good idea to go to 11% at the expense of other things that people think, and I'm talking about people at ground zero, people inside the school systems think are important to the education process. Why is the Senate pushing this so hard, Becki?
Henry, I can't answer that. I know when they came out with this, it was important to them to make a big splash, to make if we're going to do teacher pay increases, if we're going to do really catapult North Carolina.
But isn't it backfiring at this point?
Level.
I mean, the big splash is that they look like they're becoming unreasonable.
Well, that's what happened anytime you have disagreements and differences of opinion and that kind of thing. What I suspect we will do is, I spoke to several House members, several Senate leaders yesterday about the proposal that we had put out, the one that I just described to you, and most people were shaking their head, yes, that might be able to work. What we may see is a compromise somewhere maybe above the 6% raise, but lower than the 11% raise.
Yeah.
And, what we have here, too, is I think in order to try to answer your question, Henry, I really don't know. This is speculation on my part, but that the Senate wants to kind of do this all at once. The House is much more cautious in thinking that perhaps we could do a 5 or 6% raise this year, see how our revenue begins to turn around as the economy turns around in North Carolina due to some of the other decisions that they've made, and see where we are in a year or 2 years, and if we can, then go back and bump it up again.
Gotcha.
So that maybe over the course of several years, you would end up at perhaps an 11% pay increase, but not doing it all at once.
Gotcha.
But I suspect in the next couple of days that we're going to see some movement on there. We have to. I mean, both.
I heard last night, kind of behind the scenes, that there may be some finally some negotiating going on. I didn't think they'd ever get together on the Medicaid thing, and all of a sudden, boom, they had that open meeting and proposals out in the public, and they in a couple of hours they had a deal. So
right. Backed off.
the posturing, it'll end when the posturing begins to hurt one of the other sides. And
right.
and this is just my opinion. I sense now that the posturing is hurting the Senate, and McCrory has been out there yelling veto. And even though they overrode his vetoes last year, I don't think they'd be able to override this one because the House is going to stand by the governor. So the Senate knows that, and it seems to me that at some point when one side begins to have more liability than the other, that's when you start to see somebody crack.
Right. And, there are some things, too, in there and other pieces of the budget, because there are still some Medicaid questions. There's still $135 million apart on some of the Medicaid, and the Medicaid eligibility rules is, really what we're talking about.
Well, look, we only got like 3 minutes left, so I want to ask you this, because since you've started talking about Medicaid, Health and Human Services is, when they get to negotiating that, the big issue here in Greenville, in eastern North Carolina, is the issue of the UPL and SOTCA. And those are big funding mechanisms for the Brody School of Medicine at East Carolina University. There's been some disagreement about that. Senator Bob Rucho has been very hardcore against allowing the Set-Off Act to allow the med school to use that, which we are told could cost the Brody School up to $6 million. The upper payment limit Medicaid issue is going to be up to $15 million. So we're talking about $20 million plus in jeopardy for the Brody School of Medicine. What do you know about that, and has Health and Human Services begun to talk about those issues yet?
Here's what I think, and what you're talking about, too, is just at the Brody School of Medicine. We have other institutions around the state that would be impacted as well.
And UNC hospitals as well, because the UPL thing and SOTCA up till now has just been available to state hospitals,
right,
or medical schools, as in the case of Brody here.
Mm-hmm. And what I'm seeing on the Medicaid issue, really, and this goes to exactly what you have just described. This is complicated. There are so much of this money and this funding is tied to federal money, that when you take away the state money, when you make a cut at the state level, it eliminates federal funding and matching funds and those kinds of things. And so it's very complicated. It's cobbled together with federal funding and federal programs and those kind of things. Where we are, and particularly in this short session, I think that we are way beyond the point that we can really look at comprehensive Medicaid reform in this budget. I think what we need to get to is to make sure that there is enough money to pay for anticipated Medicaid expenses for the next fiscal year. And then I think what we need to do here in North Carolina, I think this budget discussion has raised some very important questions, some things that you've mentioned today, and a whole lot of other things, where really the prudent way to do this is to really look at this, put this into a study with the goal that we are going to do something about tightening Medicaid standards, the eligibility standards, and we're going to be able to get some budget predictability with this, cut Medicaid costs, but it has to be done right.
Yeah.
And to put this into a study and take a really hard look at it and look at all the moving parts and all the unintended consequences that may occur with any move within Medicaid.
I hope they do that. I hope that does not slow down any funding for the med schools, because East Carolina, I think, is at about DEFCON 2 with funding here.
Yeah, and at this point, too, again, this point in the short session, I think the prudent thing to do is make sure the money's there to get through the next fiscal year.
Yeah.
And then let's really take a look at this. And we may see some real changes in the next couple of years, but it has to be done right.
Becki, we got to go. Thank you, dear, for being on with us. You're always great, and I love your work on NC Spin, and we read your column on the Carolina Journal, and we appreciate all that you do for the citizens of North Carolina, and love having you on the show.